Good morning and thank you. It's my first time here in Manila and really, really nice to be here. See, it feels a lot like Chennai actually in India with the weather, but everything else is quite different. So it's a real pleasure to be here. What I'm going to spend the next 20, 25 minutes about is a slightly different, non-Philippine-centric perspective on where the world of business process management is going. And more specifically, not just business process management as a discipline, but how businesses themselves are evolving when we think about how the world is changing. So with that introduction, let me start. So when we think about the whole space of business process management, you can't help but start with how business processes are evolving. And it'd be fair to say that one of the first real changes that came about in the last 30 years was the publication of this book by this guy called Michael Porter, who was a professor at Harvard University in 1985, when he published this book called Competitive Strategy that laid out something called as a value chain. And for the very first time, people started organizing businesses in a manner that was slightly different from before into different functions and understanding where value is added, what kinds of things are done in-house, out-of-house, and so on. So if you think about the kind of academic rationale and the theoretical background behind much of the outsourcing and much of the business process industry, it comes starting here. And when this evolved a little further, about 5 years later, the professor of computer science at MIT who published a book called Reengineering. Actually, it was a paper in Harvard Business Review followed by a book. And reengineering actually changed a lot of things in terms of how businesses are organized. When I started my career in the mid-90s, business process reengineering was all the rage. People are redefining business processes, defining what could be done in-house, what should be done outside the house, what do they outsource, who should they partner with, how do they actually go about organizing their businesses for a maximum impact on the customer. And as he went through this, you can see a quote here from Michael Hammer, which talks about the need for businesses to focus on their customer. And of course, that's fairly motherhood statement, but as the business world evolves, this is more and more difficult to do. And if you think about why it's getting increasingly difficult to do that, think about what also happened in the mid-90s. Starting in 92, when Tim Berners-Lee published and kind of first opened up something called as the World Wide Web, there's one thing that has changed everybody's life in the last 20 years, 15 years, pick a number, right? And that's the internet. The internet has absolutely revolutionized every single thing that we do in business, we do in our daily lives today. And this evolution of the internet, from being something that was a purely static information access mechanism to something that's a lifeblood of how businesses are run today, is the fundamental driver behind how businesses are evolving around the world and what kinds of business model changes are happening because of that. And when you want to define business process management, want to define what kind of activities you can get involved in from a business process outsourcing perspective, it's always helpful to understand the role of the internet in businesses and what the challenges with some of those are, what some of the expectations of people on the internet are, and how they're actually dealing with that and what kinds of things you need to keep in place. Because as you evolve into the future and look to 2022 and look to 2022 and beyond that, the one thing that almost nobody will ever dispute is the fact that irrespective of which line of business you're in, the internet is going to be an indispensable part of your business arsenal. And you've got to be able to control that, and you've got to be able to make sure that it works for you. So what has it done primarily? If you think about how businesses have evolved and what the internet has done, you'll hear this word a lot. It's called disintermediation. Basically, it means taking out the middleman, in very simple words. And that means that if you're a business anywhere in the world, you can reach your customers directly without the need for a lot of middlemen. And when you have the ability to do that, that cuts out a lot of inefficiencies in your business process. Now, don't just think of a customer. Think of all the back office operations that we're very good at. Happens to be accounting, happens to be call centers, and so on and so forth. Is there a need for all of this stuff to actually exist the way it does today? What about the technology that underlies it? Is that going to change? How is that going to be affected by the internet? And you're going to find that in many parts of the world, and I'll share some examples later, that basically business processes themselves are being completely rewritten by using the power of the internet. So if we are going to look to the future and see what's going to happen from a business process management perspective, You got to understand what's happening to business processes themselves. And basically what's happening is that they're getting completely digitalized. So it's a great cue off from where Jonathan said, Philippines wants to go digital. Well, what does digital actually mean? It means embracing the internet in every single aspect of your business operations, right? From your customer side all the way through to your back office operations. And when our customers, whether they be in the US, whether they be in India, whether they be in Japan or Australia, when they start doing that, that's going to have an impact on how we do business here as well. So you got to consider and understand what those people are doing with some of these technologies. So if you think of an industry of your choice. I mean, I put up a few here. The one guaranteed thing, every one of these is actually being disrupted. Think of finance, think of healthcare, think of manufacturing, think of social media, gaming, insurance. You pick an industry, and the internet is basically rewriting the rules for that industry, completely rewriting what it means to do business. Companies that simply didn't exist, companies and business models that simply didn't exist, now come into fruition. So one example, say pick banking, for example. There are many, now about at least 3 or 4, I think, banks in the world, which are completely digital banks. The entire bank is nothing more than an app on your mobile phone. That's it. There is no branch. There is no person you can talk to. There is no actual physical infrastructure behind the bank. Think about how Uber has changed the whole transportation industry. Think about how e-commerce has revolutionized retail and the impact it's had on that. So every single industry that you actually can think of is being revolutionized by the internet. And it's important for us to understand what this internet means and how its challenges are affecting business processes as we look to manage the business process that comes out of the digital era. So this is a view of what I think is probably the most important business process in any company. It's, of course, customer lifecycle management. That's the reason we all exist. So and think about this, say this loop here. It's kind of structured as an infinity loop. When you look through the numbers, what you'll realize is that every single element of our interaction with the customer is today a digital interaction. Think about it. How do I look for information? I go online and I Google it. How do I ask for recommendations? I go on social media and ask my friends, hey, is this a good thing? Have you bought it? Have you used it? How do I place an order? Through a website. How do I receive and track the order? On my mobile app. How do I actually pay my bills? I do it online. How do I refer a customer? I send him a coupon through email. Every single aspect of business and every single aspect of the customer lifecycle is being impacted. And every single part is actually going digital. That's what digital means. It means that basically you are embracing the power of technology and the power of the internet to streamline and actually ease transactions, reduce transaction costs, and make it faster for you to connect to your customers. So if that's the environment in which you're doing this, then one needs to understand what this means and how do we actually go out and be successful in this era. And I think the biggest challenge for all of us in the IT industry, and especially for those of us in the business process outsourcing and the business process management industry, is the world is no longer confined to one country. Internet is without borders. Everywhere in the world is flat, easy to access, which means both businesses from a customer perspective and businesses from an operations perspective are now global entities. So how do you actually make sure that you can collaborate with and connect with customers and partners and employees all around the world in a manner that doesn't impact their day-to-day efficiency? Because if you think about it, let's say you're doing a payroll processing a function, and the application that you use to actually support that process is residing somewhere in the US or in Japan or Australia. And every morning when you come into the call center and you come into your office here, it takes you 15 minutes to log into that application because the network is slow. It probably takes you 5 minutes to actually click a button and wait for a response back. Do you think that's going to make business processes efficient? Do you think that's going to be helping us in terms of how you actually make things faster for the end customer? Well, obviously not. You can't afford to have those kinds of inefficiencies. And the old way where there was an alternative is increasingly going away. You have no alternative but to depend on internet-based technologies to actually go out and deliver services. So how do you make sure in this environment that you're actually able to deal with this challenge? And what I'd like to share with you is basically a kind of a three-step process of how you can look at this problem and what you can think about when you're solving this. First is you need to understand the audience. And I'll share some numbers and statistics with you in terms of what it means to understand this global audience. The second is you need to understand the challenges with the internet. Because the first thing that anybody will tell you who's been familiar with the internet is the internet was never designed for business. Nobody, when the internet was designed, ever thought you're going to see video on it. Nobody ever thought there's going to be e-commerce. Nobody ever thought there's going to be banking on that. So there are some fundamental, technical, structural challenges with the internet that you simply cannot wish away. It doesn't matter whether you're in the Philippines or the US or Japan. This is just basic technical limitations that you need to understand before you can actually go out and revolutionize what you do on the internet. And lastly, I'll share with you some success stories on how you can actually partner to make that thing work for you. So let's begin. The first thing, from understanding the audience perspective, it's a mobile-first world now. I mean, I don't think I need to preach to people in the Philippines, certainly in India as well, we are very much a mobile-first world. Everything first starts with the mobile, and then you go onto the desktop, whether it happens to be accessing information, watching videos, so on and so forth. You name an activity, and we started with our mobile phone these days. And why is that important? If you think about how statistics have changed for internet traffic over the last few years, in 2010, there's a very famous analyst in the US by the name Mary Meeker. She had predicted that by 2015, a majority of the world's internet traffic will be coming from mobile devices. Well, the reality is she was wrong, because it actually happened in 2014. And today, a majority, the last number I read was something close to 70% of the world's internet traffic comes from mobile devices. If you're an e-shop selling online, probably 80% of your transactions for some of the companies in India are actually made through mobile phones and mobile tablets. So mobile and designing for mobile is important. Think about even your applications that use in the business world, whether it happens to be a SaaS application or a outsourced application that you're accessing. You're probably doing it on your mobile devices far more often today than you ever did in the past. And that's a fundamental difference, because there are some constraints and there are some advantages that you need to understand when it comes to mobile devices and mobile environments. So first thing to remember in how the audience is changing, your audience is going to be mobile. Like, I don't think my daughter is ever going to see a desktop in her life. She started her life on a tablet and has now gone to a mobile phone, and God knows what she's going to do next, but certainly not going to be a desktop. That's the way the world is going, and we have to accept that. The second thing is, in that world of mobile first, it's an absolute nightmare in terms of the number of choices that people have. What this slide here represents is just a visualization of Android devices in the past year. So to give you an example, since we run the world's largest internet-connected platform, we saw 18,000 different variants of just Android devices connecting to our platform in 1 year. That was 2014. 2015, that number went up to 21,500. It does not, the absolute choice that an end customer has in terms of what kind of devices he has is absolutely mind-boggling. That's fantastic for you and me as a consumer, because we have choice, we have great price points to get devices. If you're a business running on the internet, it's an absolute nightmare, because you got to make sure your application works on every one of those variants. You don't know what the customer is actually going to choose. And with enterprises increasingly adopting strategies like BYOD and bring your own device and work at home and so on, this is something that you cannot control. You have to understand that this is another reality of the audience that you're dealing with. They just have their own choice on what kind of devices they're going to use. So we have to prepare for it. The third, technology, and especially internet-based technologies. This is just a visualization from a browser's perspective. In 2005, Internet Explorer had 80% of the market share. In 2014, nobody had more than 16% market share. The world of technology is being absolutely ravaged in terms of how fast technology is changing, and so on. So if you combine those devices, the variations, with these variations in technology, just think about what that means in terms of how user expectations are changing. Lastly, of course, what is an app and what is a mobile device itself is completely being changed, right? So today, what you could do on your mobile phone, today you can do on your watch, and tomorrow maybe it's just going to be a projected virtual screen, the kind of thing that you saw in the image, in the video, is what you're going to be able to do. And those are the kinds of expectations that people have. When the next generation comes into the workforce, this is not going to be new to them, this is going to be expected for them. And they want to be able to work in that environment. When all that is happening, we as consumers are not getting any more patient. right? This is actual data from research that we did around the world. Look at what those mean. In less than 2 seconds, people want web pages to load, apps to work, and content to get streamed to their devices. Instant load times in certain cases. That number of 18% was less than 6 2 years ago. It's gone up 3 times in 2 years. So people's expectations are absolutely exploding as well. So while all that technology is changing and you have more choice, the expectations are not getting any lesser. On the business side, again, no different. 85% of people who use business applications want it to work at least as quickly on their mobile device as they do on their desktops. Trust me, this is nice to say in a research survey when we do consumers. When you're actually going out and delivering this is anything but easy. And you have to be able to deliver to these expectations if we are actually going to change the way business is done and the way business processes are managed and measured. So with that kind of perspective on the audience, let me share with you some challenges on what actually happens when you try to do any of those things on the internet. So for those of you who are familiar with the internet is not one network. It's a collection of networks, a network of networks. What this graph tells you here is if you're a global player or you're dealing with global players, how many networks do you need to be a part of to actually reach a big proportion of your user base spread around the world? And what you're telling is, if I'm only in the 10 biggest networks of the world, I'm only going to access about 30% of the world's users. Whereas if I'm over 1,000 at 1,000 networks, I'm still at 93%. So any one provider in this space is unlikely, if you, from a domestic perspective, to have the ability to give you performance and security and so on for users around the world. You need to have a global platform that's pervasive across in excess of 1,000, 2,000, 3,000 networks, because the internet has no borders, and this is how the traffic actually gets spread. So the first challenge you have to understand is that the global nature means no one person who's typically domestic can have all of this stuff. So you need to have partnerships with global players who can help you deliver that. The second, this graph represents different average internet connectivity speeds across the world. I don't know if you can read the countries, but basically, if you look across the space, it's a complete spectrum of how much connectivity people have. So when you have bandwidth differences, it means that you can't keep doing the same things the same way everywhere around the world. So in South Korea, for example, if you pick out your mobile phone, you can get an average speed of 25 megabits per second, 24, 25 megabits per second. In India, a broadband connection average is about 2.5. In the US, it's actually about 14. In Australia, it's about 11. And we measure this on a quarterly basis and publish a public report that you can see. But the fact is that if you have different connectivity speeds, your application and your technologies and your underlying infrastructure cannot work the same way. You have to adapt to the reality that this is how the infrastructure in different countries is different. Next challenge, I told you mobile. So depending on whether you're connecting through, in your coffee shop, or you're in a house on a broadband connection, whether you're on a Wi-Fi or an LTE or a 3G or a 4G connection, your speeds vary. And when speeds vary, the kind of experiences that your customer has is going to be impacted by that. Remember, it comes back to that 2-second rule I was sharing. We are still impatient. We still want it to work, whether it happens to be on a mobile phone or it happens to be on a residential connection. The other thing that is the number, kind of the top of the mind. We referred to the Bangladesh hacker recently, earlier, is security on the internet. If you're working and have to do anything with internet technologies, you have to understand that it's a wild west out there. Basically, there's a lot of stuff happening on the internet that's driven by malicious actors, and you have to be able to protect your infrastructure against all kinds of malicious actors in the internet, whether it be hackers, whether it happens to be people who want to bring down your digital infrastructure, your cloud infrastructure, and so on. And this is just a view of the kind of growth in the size and the volume of attacks that we are seeing. Just bottom line, it's kind of growing exponentially. Every single quarter, we see more attacks, bigger attacks, more sophisticated attacks. So the malicious guys are getting faster and smarter and bigger. And if you are going to do business, you got to keep up with them and try and protect your infrastructure in that environment. Are they only bringing down websites? No, they're actually going a lot deeper than that, and it's getting more sophisticated. We have a saying that says, if you're on the internet, there are only 2 types of people on the internet. Those who've been attacked and those who don't know they've been attacked. That's the reality. You've all been attacked. It's just a question of, do you know it or do you not know it? And what kind of attacks and what kind of combination of attacks is something that you will actually learn in this space, being very, very complex and very, very sophisticated. And these attacks don't last. It's not at 6 in the morning, I'm going to try and done. these last weeks, months on end, when these guys are really, really committed, and you can actually have them, attack your infrastructure for an extended period of time, and you need to be able to have the kind of partners who can help you protect against that kind of an attack. And these are multi-day, multi-week attacks. You'll hear about problems like DD4BC, which is basically ransom attacks on the internet. They will send you an email saying, you will pay me so much money, else I will bring down your infrastructure in the next 2 hours. This is actual ransomware on the internet. This is very, very common in countries around the world, and this is one of the biggest problems these days on the internet. You have other kinds of malicious actors, and in the interest of time, I'm not going to detail, but just believe that it's, as I said, it's a wild west out there, and you really need to be on your guard in terms of protecting your digital infrastructure. And last but not the least, in the terms of challenges, that picture was about Internet of Things. What is the internet and who is connecting to the internet is a very, very blurry definition today. And the way they're doing that is by this thing called APIs. The reason I bring it up, though it's a slightly technical term, the reason it's a challenge for all of us as businesses is that it's actually increasing the volume of transactions on the internet to the point that you actually are able to deal with the scale and growth of it. But at the same time, it's offering you a fantastic opportunity for innovation. So if you're doing, as a business, you have a bunch of APIs that you make available to your partners, then new business models come up. So here are some examples, right? Uber and Sonos and Citymapper, and you pick some other examples as well. All they are actually doing, they are just aggregating information from different platforms, so the use of APIs, and putting a user interface on that actually transacts business. So Uber is all about, say, take Google Maps, take the credit card payment gateway, put that together, give you a small way to book the cab, and you're done. That's a fundamental core of what Uber does, and similarly, other businesses as well. So the internet is actually fostering a lot of innovation as well. And the challenge is that if you don't keep up with this innovation, your entire industry might get disrupted. Think about it. I mean, Uber's valuation in 60, 70, God knows what the last number of $1 billion is all based on the fact that they're going to revolutionize and change transportation as an industry beyond anybody's recognition. Similarly, commerce, similarly in other industries. So the internet is a very powerful means to actually revolutionize business models, and you need to keep aware of that as you actually work in this space. And what do people who are working fear about? Again, a customer survey. Many of them worry about security, as I said, and many of them worry about performance. Because if you don't deal with those two fundamental requirements of secure performance and fast performance, then your business processes are going to be affected. So how do we actually deal with that? Our approach is to partner with networks and telecom providers and ISP providers around the world. PLDT in Philippines is our exclusive partner. And what we do is we take the internet and put an overlay on that and make it ready for business by providing performance, reliability, and security. I'm not going to do a pitch on what Akamai does. I'm going to be here the whole day. I'm happy to share with you more. What I will do instead is share with you a few examples of what we've done. Right? So slightly, maybe hazy graph. What this shows you in these blue spikes above is the variation in traffic volumes. Think of it as a representative variation in user volumes through the course of time. And what the orange line here represents is the performance that we've been able to give in the face of constantly varying traffic volumes. Why is this important? Because you can't predict when actually something happens. What if there was an earthquake in Japan, as it happened a few years ago, unfortunately? What if there is oil spill? What if there is a news that there is some business is going bankrupt in the US, that the impacts on the markets, impacts on trading, and so on. You have a lot of spikes of traffic on the internet. Or, for example, even something as simple as there is an Olympic Games being played, right? So then you have a lot of traffic volume that rises on the internet, and you have to be able to actually deal with that by making sure your user experience is not impacted. And that's the kind of performance that you have to be able to deliver. A really flat line of performance, which means irrespective of what's happening on the internet, I need my user experience to stay good under that 2-second mark, the benchmark that I was talking about, that many people like to use as a rule. Second variation, this is a view of an in-house application. Actually, it's not an in-house. We at Akamai use a third-party CRM application that's hosted in the US in our data centers, and it's used by our offices around the world. And what you're seeing here is the difference in performance that we can make for that CRM application across different offices of Akamai. And this is Bangalore, this is Hong Kong, and so on. And you'll see some variation there. And you'll see there's a big dramatic difference in the performance. Now, performance technically is nice and fine. It sounds like an interesting number. But what does it actually translate into? It translates into real productivity gains. And this is a share of some kind of numbers for our Bangalore office. This is slightly a couple of years old. Now we have more people, so we're actually saving more hours. But if you actually use an application in an outsourced manner hosted in the US, if that can be actually Akamai's, look at the kind of difference that you can make to productivity here around the world, because the internet as a fundamental mechanism is preventing you from doing that, and by using some acceleration technologies, you can make a big difference. Lastly, this is a view from how when you manage the internet, you can get a real-time view of what's actually happening. It's a view from our portal. It's a customer of ours who sells online tickets around the world for different events, sport events, movie shows, and dramas. You can in real time begin to understand what's happening with their infrastructure. This is a view of a graph of where the people come from, what kind of volumes he's seeing. And the reason you need to have a real-time view is you can actually start identifying newer business opportunities based on that. So you need to have that ability to actually view the performance of the user experience on the internet in a real-time manner. What this represents is another customer of ours. Imagine you have a website, you want to launch a promotion, you did, it went out to the mobile device, and then people started accessing it. Do you have a view into how they're actually experiencing the power of the internet and how they're actually being able to use the promotion that you sent out? This graph here shows you where the demand is exceeding supply, which means that if you are trying to provide business processes that actually help and deliver efficient customer service, you'll know that at this time, it's likely to be bad performance, which means I'm going to get more call center calls saying, hey, my website is not working, what do I do about it, and how do I actually correct that? So it gives you a real-time view into being prepared for business events that you otherwise can't control very easily. So this is another view of how you leverage the power of analytics and leverage the power of a global platform to deliver user experience. So let me just conclude by kind of emphasizing the obvious. Our expectations of the internet are absolutely enormous, whether it be as a business or at a personal level. And we believe that if you are going to achieve any of those, you've got to be able to work with a platform that's global in nature, that actually solves these problems of performance and security at a global level. And that's kind of what we do. And what we do in Philippines is partner with PLDT to offer these capabilities to our customers here, whether you be a gaming company, whether you be a SaaS company, whether you be a logistics company, whether you be a software developer. Any industry that actually uses the internet in its business processes can actually leverage the capabilities of our platform to go out and deliver services and experiences to your users around the internet. So with that, let me stop, guys. I know running out of time, but thank you very much. I'll be here all day if you want to know more about some of the cool stuff that we do. I know mentioned that you're all customers of Akamai, because if you ever use the internet on a daily basis, we carry up to 30% of the global internet traffic. So it's almost inevitable that you've actually gone through our servers without actually knowing that you're using us. So want to know more about that, I'd be happy to share more information on that. But with that, thank you very much for your time, and I hope you found this interesting.